Hello, my name's Matt and you're watching Pixel Burn, where I take a look at some of the more interesting things that happened in gaming this week, now that I've recovered from Christmas. 2013 has finally been banished to the churning inferno of hell where it belongs, like the screaming ghost of a paedophile. In its place is glorious space year 2014, in which we're all flying around on hoverboards and drinking tea that's been materialised out of thin air, and above all else, playing SimCity without requiring a constant internet connection. Yes, in a post on the official SimCity blog this weekend just gone, Maxis general manager Patrick Buchner proudly announced SimCity Offline is coming. Besides being the title of perhaps the most avant-garde video game porn tie-in ever conceived, it also confirms what many have long suspected about the game's always online requirements. Specifically that it was just your garden variety DRM dressed up in a gossamer thin tissue of pixie dust and marketing horseshit. Like too many games nowadays, Maxis' latest instalment of the venerable city building franchise required you to be always connected to EA servers to build your cities. Depressingly small cities at that, which you had to specialise to insane degrees in order to actually get anywhere. The official reason for this was attributed to Glassbox, the engine the game was built on, which supposedly tracks data for up to 100,000 individual virtual people going about their virtual lives in your virtual cities. At SimCity's launch, Maxis boss Lucy Bradshaw told Polygon that since there's so much data to process, the game offloaded what she called a significant amount of calculations to the game's servers in the cloud. All this cloud computing interweb mainframe technobrain talk isn't entirely without merit, however. The popular toil, misery and death simulator Dwarf Fortress, for example, tracks insane amounts of data at any given time, from big things like the phases of the moon, all the way down to the number of T-cells in an individual dwarf's bloodstream. So even though the game looks like someone ate a stack of dot matrix printouts from 1988, washed it down with food colouring and then puked it all out onto a chalkboard, Dwarf Fortress actually requires a pretty hefty PC to run it. SimCity doesn't track anywhere near as much data in as much insane detail as Dwarf Fortress does, but tracking 100,000 Sim citizens is no small feat, and so the cloud server maths waffle initially seemed quite plausible. For about 2 days at least, which is about how long it took for some clever clogs to notice that the data going from their PC to EA servers was really rather negligible, and nowhere near enough to support Maxis and EA's claims of outsourcing calculations to the magical kingdom of Care-a-Lot. Within weeks of SimCity's release, a chap by the name of Azza created a mod that let you play the game entirely offline, minus all the multiplayer features of course. A few weeks to do something Maxis insisted was contrary to their vision for the game and would require, quote, a significant amount of engineering work to implement. A significant amount being about 6.5 months work, according to this blog post from lead engineer Simon Fox, head of the team charged with reworking SimCity to run offline. Simon even obliquely refers to Azza's mod, mentioned earlier, claiming it didn't allow players to communicate with other cities they had created locally, nor save the current state of their cities. But it still let you play the game without an internet connection. You know, that mandatory continuous connection to the SimCity servers that you said was all absolutely essential for doing all those city calculations that they never actually did in the first place. And so much for Maxis' vision of SimCity as an interconnected online experience, a genuinely interesting idea in theory, ruined alas by poor short-sighted implementation, and EA's continuing satanic crusade to squeeze every penny it can from every shred of code in every single bloody game it publishes. Basically what this all means is that EA are going to be turning off a bunch of servers sometime soon to save some pennies, so, well, at least it's good news for modders, eh? Since they won't have to deal with that pesky DRM anymore. In other news, at this month's Consumer Electronics Show, Sony unveiled its new video game streaming service PlayStation Now, built on tech developed by its wholly owned subsidiary Gaikai. On stage to explain what PlayStation Now is all about was CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment Andrew House, who always reminds me of Lord Peter Baelish from Game of Thrones for some reason.
I have a friend who wants to try something new, something daring. And he was so grateful to me for providing this fresh experience.
Thankfully I have this handy visual aid so I don't get the two mixed up, otherwise I could look like a right old tit. The basic idea behind PlayStation Now is to let you play all those classic PS1, PS2 and PS3 games you loved all over again by having them funnel down the internet straight into your PS4 or PS Vita. And your PS3 too, although why you'd want to stream a slightly blurrier version of The Last of Us to your PS3 when you could just buy it is beyond me. particularly if your internet connection isn't all that hot.
Hey.
Streaming classic PS1, PS2 games is a different matter, of course. You don't really need to worry about things like frame rate drops or slightly less crisp graphics for games that you probably originally played on an SD TV anyhow. And since these games will be running on original hardware, you get a more technically authentic experience than you would than by playing them through an emulator. The best way to play all those old games you love is still on the original consoles, with the original discs of course. For people who sold their PS1s and PS2s donkey's years ago, however, PlayStation Now is a pretty spiffy way of bringing backwards compatibility to their now probably slightly grubby PS4s. No details have been given on pricing yet, but Sony have said they'll be offering a subscription service as well as the option to rent games on an individual basis. And if you don't own any consoles but you buy a Sony Bravia TV this year, you'll be able to stream PlayStation Now content directly to that as well. Sony also plan to eventually bring the service to non-Sony devices like iPads and smartphones, in theory eliminating the need for Sony hardware altogether. Not all of paradise and nostalgia of course. While Sony have yet to confirm some of the finer details, you can expect to pay again for older games that you already own. There's also no guarantee that some of your favourite games will ever make it to the service, thus confining some of gaming's most beautiful moments to the dustbin of history.
Come on, people. You'll pull through, I know you can. Shake it off, people. Self-diagnose, you can make it. Don't leave me, people.
Barry from Resident Evil there, in happier times. Despite things like the to-be-expected latency issues, unless you live right next to one of Sony's servers, and the ongoing question of digital rights and ownership, I'm still feeling rather positive towards PlayStation Now. Speaking as someone whose last Sony purchase was a Sony Discman back in 1996 and who mostly played PlayStation games on my younger brother's PS1 and PS2, this seems like a great way to replay some of my favourites like Silent Hill and Kingdom Hearts. Yes, I played and enjoyed Kingdom Hearts once upon a time. Don't all drop dead of shock on me now. Finally, from a curating perspective, it brings a little historical magic to console audiences. Younger gamers who might never have played some of the best PS1 or PS2 games ever will be able to do so from the comfort of their den or treehouse, and ideally gain a better understanding of how far gaming has come since those days. Or they'll just laugh at all the primitive polygons and call you a decrepit old fossil because kids have no bloody sense of history anymore. And that's about all the praise I'm willing to give a vast trans-global corporate conglomerate. Closed beta for PlayStation Now kicks off at the end of January, with the full rollout coming to the United States around about summer. Finally, from corporate praise to corporate sticking the boot in now, as news from Japan this week painted a rather grim picture for Nintendo. Nintendo declared this week they will be operating at a loss for the second year in a row, with their net income for the financial year now predicted to be a net deficit of 25 billion yen, or 146 million British pounds. A pretty hefty drop considering Nintendo had hoped for a profit of 55 billion yen. On the bright side, if you convert it into bison dollars, it's a loss of only 29 million. The major contributing factor to this dismal financial performance is sales of the Wii U, which was estimated to shift 9 million units this year. Instead, it only shifted 2.8 million, a mere 31% of expected sales. The 3DS has also seen a drop in estimated sales, although nowhere near as sharp as the Wii U's, with 13.5 million 3DS units sold out of the 18 million Nintendo were hoping for. Nevertheless, it was still the top-selling games platform in the US in 2013, so every cloud, silver linings, etc, etc. Despite these significant losses, Nintendo still has a chunk of change in its coffers, so it's not going to suddenly sink without trace overnight, although it does beg the question of where they're going to go from here. Fanboys, of course, will say onwards and upwards, because Nintendo can literally do no wrong in their eyes. To those of us a little older and wiser, however, and who weren't indoctrinated by Nintendo as children, the situation has more than a few shades of Sega haunting it. Not a whole host admittedly, but enough to give one a grim sense of deja vu. One uncomfortable truth Nintendo seems unwilling or unable to face is that the Wii U simply doesn't compete in hardware terms with this new generation. And before someone complains that it's about the games and not the system specs, please direct me to the huge library of system-selling Wii U exclusives, because I already have the director's cut of Deus Ex Human Revolution on my PC. Sure, the new Super Mario 3D World has been universally hailed as a return to form, but what else is there? Wind Waker HD perhaps, I never did get around to playing the original. I'm also interested in the forthcoming Hyrule Warriors, or whatever that will be called when it's released, and I'm not even a Dynasty Warriors fan. Meanwhile, Bayonetta 2, the one game I'd most certainly buy a Wii U for, still isn't out yet. And to be honest, I'm more inclined to buy a 3DS over a Wii U right now for games like Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem, the Professor Layton series, and not forgetting the forthcoming Persona Q. Hell, I'd get a 3DS purely to buy Defenders of Oasis from the Nintendo eShop. I loved that game when I played it on the Sega Game Gear 20 years ago. Look, I'll happily admit I'm a skeptic, okay? I didn't grow up with the same kind of unconditional love for Nintendo that some of you might have, so forgive me if I don't immediately drop my trousers and howl like a chimp at the merest hint of anything involving an Italian plumber. Unfortunately, as much as this may disgust some such people, Nintendo has to appeal to people like me if it wants to shift its bloody console. And don't tell me to just give the Wii U a chance. The Wii U has had at least a whole year to get its act together and shape up, and it hasn't. Nothing about the Wii U makes me immediately piss myself with glee and want to rush out, drenched from the waist down, to buy one. All I see instead is a humdrum collection of, oh that's nice, and one or two, that could be interesting, and not a whole lot of, wow that's amazing, or oh my god I need to play that. Nintendo President Satoru Iwata has accepted full responsibility for the company's waning fortunes and has apologised to shareholders, pledging to stay on until the company's forward momentum has been restored. I sincerely wish him the best of luck with this, although I fail to see how he's going to manage it. Perhaps this will encourage Nintendo to do a bit of introspection as a company and take concerted steps to adapt somewhat, instead of expecting everything else to adapt around them. Or they might start developing a new console, writing off the Wii U as a failed gamble to catch lightning twice with under-spec'd hardware. Maybe they'll even finally try to properly figure out that whole online thing, and actually do a decent job of it. Or perhaps they'll just blame their misfortune on the year of Luigi, and replace him with a new Mario brother. That's all for this episode of Pixel Burn. If you liked it, then please do let me know. At the very least, I hope you found it tolerable. And if you didn't like it, well, you can go now.